Hello, Maze fans. This is Bill M., and I'm back to share some more thoughts on Maze in commentary number 5. And this time I'm raising the stakes and going to use PowerPoint slides. As I said in earlier clips, I found myself for years in the same sort of position that a lot of Maze fans have found themselves in, which is, okay, I figured out the shortest path from room 1 to room 45 and back, using what might be some clues, but mostly, admittedly, a lot of trial and error and mapping and scribbling. I broke down and looked at what the riddle is along with its solution, and I have accepted the fact that there was no way in hell I was ever going to get that on my own, not in 100 years. However, there are still some things left in the book to explore, lots of things, but in this case, I'm going to be focused on trying to figure out what the author's intended clues were. Not only the clues to pick the correct doors along the shortest path, but the clues for all of the other doors in the maze. And in the previous clip, I had talked about what constitutes a correct door. In some cases, there is no definitively correct door, because, for example, you may be in a trap room where your only other choice for exits are going to be to another trap room. And in some path rooms, the correct door might depend on whether you're on your way to room 45 or from 45 on your way back to room 1. But once again, we're reverse engineering here. Like a lot of fans, I've already figured out the shortest path on my own, mapped out the path rooms and the loop rooms and the trap rooms to get an idea of which other doors constitute the correct ones to take from each particular room. But we do know that the author put clues in for each of these rooms, so like a lot of fans in the same position as me, I'm trying to determine what those clues all were. Anyway, enough preamble. In this clip, part 5 of my maze commentary, I'm going to offer my suggested strategies on doing all of this and my reasoning for them. Now, in a previous clip, I said that one of the best/worst things about maze is the ambiguous nature of the clues. It's really, really easy to let your mind wander in interpretation of things, not just the objects in the room, but words in the dialogue or why characters may be doing what they do. And as I said, this can be fun. This can be a fun activity, in and of itself, especially if you go through the book with a friend or another person you know. But having done that myself for decades, I decided I wanted to get a little more focused on trying to really understand the nature of the clues from Christopher Manson, because I don't think it's a hopeless endeavor to find out what the intended clues really are. I would argue that there are ways of arriving at answers that are a little more plausible than others. So before we let our mind wander down endless interpretations, let's take a step back from all of this. Start from the beginning. What do we know about maze for sure? I don't mean what exact clues do we know for sure to be clues, but rather what do we know about the nature of the clues in the book? I want to first try to answer that question. I also want to share some clues I found, which I am 99% certain must be what the author intended. I'm going to cover that in a future clip or 2 or 3 or 12. And finally, I want to see how we might be able to use this information to help get a better idea on what's a real clue versus a wild speculation that only happens to fit coincidentally. Now, 2 quick things before we go further. First, please give this clip a like if you enjoy it. Second of all, this clip does have some spoilers, some minor spoilers, though. So if you have never gone through the book before, I suggest you buy it and do it, and then and only then come back to these clips. Anyway, let's begin. What are we explicitly told about the clues? Well, in the book's page of directions, there are 5 things it says about clues. 1. There are any number of clues in the drawings and in the story to help you choose the right door in each room. Another thing it says is that clues in a series of rooms may relate to one another and may indicate a path. And as I think I said before, a lot of maze fans seem to ignore this because they focus too much on the next bit that we are told, which is other clues may refer to a specific door in a single room. We are also told that anything in this book might be a clue. And finally, we are told that not all clues are necessarily trustworthy. So let's take a closer look at these 5 things one at a time. Okay, 1. There are any number of clues in the drawings and in the story to help you choose the right door in each room. Okay, so a clue might be in the drawing, or it might be in the dialogue, or in some cases there may be more than one clue to help you choose correctly. But for every choice of doors you can make from any room, there exists one or more clues somewhere to tell you the right choice to make. So in the directions, point number 2 were given. Clues in a series of rooms may relate to one another and may indicate a path. So in the example I gave in one of the earlier clips, in room 1, the dialogue says there was some faint ringing heard behind one of the doors, and if you take the door to room number 20 from there, the description says the ringing stopped. Or if instead you took room 26 from room 1, there's a scene in that where the narrator picks up a bell and rings it and asks the group if that's what they heard. So I would guess that that's an example of what the author might mean by clues relating to each other in a series of rooms. There are several bits of dialogue like that, as well as some rooms that connect and may show some before and after effects in the pictures. Point 3 was that other clues may refer to a specific door in a single room. Now, as I said, this is what I see so many other Maze fans overly focused on. They put all their time and effort focusing on one room, looking at only that room, trying to find one and only definitive clue in that room, specific to that room for the correct door. Well, to be fair, maybe in most cases, that is where the clues are. However, what if the clue to pick the right door in a given room is not to be found in that same room, but it's in another room? So to give an example, there are several rooms that have umbrellas. There are several rooms that have top hats. There are 2 rooms that contain a bowling pin, rooms 8 and 18. So is there a clue in room 8 that maybe helps you pick the correct door in 18, or vice versa? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but I just find it interesting that in almost all of the Maze commentaries I've seen and read, nobody else seems to ever consider this possibility. Or again, for that matter, the idea of clues being in a series of rooms, point 2. But let's move on to indication number 4. The author says anything in this book may be a clue. So that does make me wonder if the extra illustrations in the book, of which there are 2, there's an extra illustration near the beginning of the book, for example, if that might mean something. And the other one I'm thinking of is the drawings, the directions page. Actually, there's also the front cover of the book. There's also the page that says the next page, an illustration. So anyway, I have the directions on the next slide, which I'll show you. So this is where all those directions I listed came from. Now, some readers have pointed out that one of the hands in one of the corners doesn't match the rest. If you look at the 4 hands, 3 of them are right hands, and the hand in the upper right corner is a left hand. Now, another illustration that is in the book, but isn't of any of the rooms, is the title page inside the book, which I have here. We do see a mold for a key in this illustration, and we do know that the trap rooms match that key shape if you were to map them out. I've also noticed that there seem to be letters in here. It looks like there's an N, a Y, an L, an S, or maybe that's a Z. Is it a clue for something somewhere? I don't know. But some have speculated, like with the directions, maybe this one hand is kind of an indication that in some of these rooms you have to look for the odd one out. So there may be something different with one of the doors, and that's where the door that you take is. Like maybe there are objects pointing to 3 of the doors, and there's a 4th door that doesn't have something pointing to it, and that's what you take. But let's get back to point number 5. Not all clues are necessarily trustworthy. Okay, so does this mean that a clue to indicate a correct door may in fact be with equal probability a clue to trick you into taking that door? And we're back to the problem of reading clues being no better than blind guessing? No, I don't necessarily buy that idea. I have a hard time believing that the author would go through this whole effort of creating this elaborate maze with all these drawings and objects and storytelling, only to make the clues completely ambiguous. I would think that anybody who wrote a puzzle book certainly wants to stump the readers to a great extent, but on some level that author also wants a bright reader to eventually solve the puzzles, to see the author's genius. I mean, I suppose it is possible that Christopher Manson is some sadist who created this book with purely random things in it just to let people rack their brains over nothing, but I don't think so. Also, the fact that we now know that we know what the riddle is and can see how it's hidden in room 45, as well as a solution, well, that tells us that there are indeed some intentional clues in the book. Now, having said all of that, I have some further hypotheses about clues that I would like to share. And again, remember, we're trying to understand the nature of clues in this book to help narrow down the ideas from the infinite number of ways a mind can wander. So here are some ideas that I have to that end. The first is that if a proposed clue seems really, really intricate, then it's probably not a real clue. It's more likely just your mind trying to rationalize a reason. So, like, some of the math answers I've seen are a good example of this. I'll see somebody say, well, if you count all the letters in the sentence in the dialogue and you subtract the number of the room you're in and you multiply by the number of these things in this corner, and there's an S on the wall, and that is this letter of the alphabet, and you add that, and that gives you the correct number of the door. Something like that just seems too far-fetched for what an author would be expecting the readers to do. So again, if the explanation seems way too elaborate for the author to have thought up, then my guess is that it's not a clue, and it's just your mind trying to rationalize an answer. Or at the very, very least, it might be a clue, but it's not the only one intended for the correct door. So, likewise, number 2, if you see something in an illustration that doesn't seem to be drawn very clearly, then it probably wasn't intentional. So in room 6, for example, there are some people who say, hey, I see a face in the creases of that thing over the door here. And half of the readers say, no, I don't see a face there. Likewise, I had a friend who thought the crumpling of the paper in the bottom right-hand corner of room number 1 was actually a hand with a finger pointing the way. And he would say, well, it takes a lot of imagination to see it, but it kind of sort of looks like a hand pointing to the door. Again, I don't think so. It seems to be the same problem of reading things into what's not there. Not to mention the fact that the answer in that particular case was not to the correct door. Go figure. Another thing I want to remind people of is that we do know that it's possible for a clue to be a play on words. One of the reasons we know this is because of the riddle of the maze. For example, and here is a spoiler about the riddle, in room 45, we see a shoe next to a horseshoe, and if we take the horseshoe as a letter U, and we take the letter U and the words of shoe, S-H-O-E, you rearrange those 5 letters and get H-O-U-S-E, the word house, which is one of the words of the riddle. So we know that really is the answer there, because the author did reveal the riddle eventually, and before that, the hints to get the words. And yeah, long story short, we do know that this is how he encoded the word. So again, at the very least, this tells us that if you're looking at things in the room and playing around with the letters and the names of the objects, it's not necessarily a far-fetched thing that the author never intended if you find something, because we have examples of it. We also know that Christopher Manson wrote a couple of other puzzle books that had to do with words you get from pictures. There was The Practical Alchemist, and The Rails I Tote was another book. So the bottom line is that I believe we may find other clues that are based on this sort of wordplay. In fact, I have found some other clues throughout the book that I am almost certain are the intended clues, and they were based on wordplay. In fact, I am going to go one step further with a bold hypothesis I only came up with recently. I suspect most of the clues in the book involve some kind of wordplay. Maybe even that every room has at least one wordplay clue. I don't know. Just a hypothesis, but something I'm going to throw out there. And another hypothesis I have is that there are many rooms where the correct answer is found through the process of elimination. So I talked about that example with the directions page and the 4 hands. One particular example of this is room 12, which is one of those rare cases where I am 99% certain I figured out the clue that the author intended. I'll talk about that in a future clip. One more thing I think is worth mentioning are the placement of arrows. In many of the rooms, you can see an arrow or some other object pointing to a door, like an umbrella or a stick or rake or something. Now, whether it's pointing to the door you should take seems to vary. In many of the rooms, if not in most of the cases, I've noticed that the arrow or the pointing object usually does not point to the correct door. It will point to some other door, but not the correct one. In some other cases, however, it does point to the right door. In room number 45, for example, the spear seems to point to 23, the correct door to take. And to date, I have not found out what other indication there is that that's the correct door. And there are also some cases where something is pointing to a door, but not necessarily the right or wrong door. There are a couple of trap rooms, for example, that have something pointing to a particular door, but, again, doesn't matter because it doesn't get you out of the trap anyway. And in room 45, for example, that room in the basement with like the broken couch, there's a structure pointing directly to a door, but as the tour group even says in the dialogue, it doesn't really matter since that's the only exit from the room. Now, I suspect that if an author as crafty as Christopher Manson wanted to insert an untrustworthy clue, it would be something like an arrow pointing to a door. That would be one way to trick somebody into picking a door without really thinking things through or taking examination first. And I got 2 more here, 7 and 8. Another hypothesis I have, 7 here, is that every trap room has some kind of indication hidden in it to tell you that you're in a trap room and that there's no going back. Likewise, I think with at least some of the doors that lead to a trap room, there is some warning about them. In room 41, for example, we see a slide leading down to one of the trap rooms, and in front of it is a picture of a frog who is eyeing a tasty fly buzzing around in the air. I think that's a pretty clear omen right there. Also, in the CD-ROM game, Riddle of the Maze, I noticed that if you hang around any trap room long enough, you'll hear some voices laughing. And one final hypothesis I would like to propose. There may be a room where there's a correct door and another door that isn't quite correct, but wouldn't do too much harm if you were to take it. And what I suspect is that there are clues to imply each one. However, the one leading to the shortest path requires a little more ingenuity to see. Now, to give you an example of what I mean by this, I'm going to talk about that in my next clip, which covers what I believe the intended clues were for solving room 1 and the clues in the 3 wrong rooms from room 1. So, thank you for listening. And we'll see you again on the next clip.